Hello class. This recording is on Oracle Chapter 4, the chapter on functions. So please take a moment to get your PowerPoint slides in front of you and also open up the book to Chapter 4, Oracle book to Chapter 4. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the PowerPoints first, and then I will go through the book and highlight anything else that needs to be highlighted. So, going to slide 2, what this chapter discusses is Oracle functions. So, we basically group functions in SQL into two types, aggregate functions and row-level functions. What does that mean? Okay, an aggregate function. This is a function that returns a result based on multiple rows. Okay. So for example, if you want to sum up 100 rows or the first 100 rows, or sum up the hours column or the wage column or the whatever column, if you want to sum or average, what you're doing is you're summing, you're taking a whole group of rows and you're getting one output. Okay, that's what we do when we sum. If you've got 100 rows, when you add it up, you have one result, whatever that result may be. If it all adds up to 1,500, then that's what the result is. That's the sum. If it averages out to 500, then that's the result. When you're finding the max, you're finding the maximum in a particular row, or you're finding the count of that row. So when you're getting one output, or when you're grouping a set of rows to get a result, you are aggregating or using an aggregate function. Versus you have what's called a row-level function, which operates on every row, or rather one row at a time. So if you want to do something to every row, for example, I have a whole bunch of names, and all these names were maybe the doctors that attended this conference. So we need to put a doctor in front of every name. So I want to do that for every row. That would be a row-level function. So those are the two basic types of functions. So here what I've done is I've just grouped up a whole bunch of string functions, and string functions are usually row-level functions because you do that on every row. The first function here is a substring function where it finds a portion of the string. InString does the same thing, but you can look at the details up in the book later. RPad is where you're adding something to the right side of a string. LPad is where you're adding something to the left side. Upper is where you're going to make something uppercase. Lower is where you're going to make it lowercase. Like is where you're going to be finding something. So this chapter is rather detailed, but I didn't want to put in all the details in the slides because I didn't want to rewrite the book in the slide. So I just kind of put just the important things in the slide. So that's why I asked you to get your book handy in front of you. So if you'll turn to page 145 of your book, and we can just talk about some important things in the chapter as per the book. Okay, so I'm just going to turn over the pages. Page 146, you've got the count function, and we've already used the count function. Anyway, this just counts out the number of rows. And if you look at page 147, you have the first command there is select count star from student, comma section, comma grade report. So you're doing a join of those tables. Now, do you remember what kind of join this is? This would be a Cartesian join, a very risky kind of join, because look at the number of rows that you get, 321,024. Okay, so that's why sometimes the count comes in handy, because if you do a count first before you send it to print or whatever it is, you can make sure that you're not sending 321,024 rows to print. Okay, so this would be a Cartesian join where you have forgotten to join the table. In the middle of the page, we're showing the where clauses that join the table. So you're first joining the student table to the grade report table, and then you join the grade report table to the section table. Okay. Now, as you do this chapter and chapters onwards, typically, as I have been grading the stuff over, the past few semesters, years, or whatever you want to call it, what I notice is people forget to join sometimes. What you do is you list your tables, because you know where you want the information, so you end up listing your tables, but then you end up forgetting to do the join. So you end up getting more rows than you are supposed to be getting. So be very careful. Every table that is listed in the from should be involved in the joins. Okay, so every table should be joined somehow or other. Okay, to however your joins are going to be, because I cannot predict how the joins are going to be. I can predict it in my little database that I created here because I know the database, but in your database that you may have at work or wherever that you're going to be joining tables, I mean, you need to figure out what the foreign key, primary key relationships are and figure out what the join is. But the main thing that I'm trying to stress is whenever you have the from there, the tables listed in the from, make sure that everything is joined. Okay, turning over the page, page 148. We are using a distinct, okay, we kind of use the distinct attribute here. So the distinct will give you the number of distinct rows, or, the number of distinct rows there are. So that's what the distinct is. Okay, so we talk about other basic functions. Turning to page 150, we have examples of aggregate functions. Middle of the page, there's select sum hours, so you're summing the hours. An aggregate function, page 150 down at the bottom, I'm showing an example of where you're averaging the hours, where you're finding the max of the hours, where you're counting the hours. And I just kind of put that all in one because we could. I didn't have to create a separate query for every one of them. So I went ahead and created the max hours and the average hours and count of hours all at the same time there. Now, I don't think this little employee table has been created for you in this database. So if you want to practice this part out, you would have to create this little employee table on your own to practice this. Okay, the row level functions, page 151, one of the very important row level functions is the NVL function. This is a very important function. What is this function? This is the function that handles null values. Now, the null value concept, it's a very funny concept because a null is not equal to 0. It's not equal to a space. It's not equal to anything. A null is a null. It's a value on its own. What is it? It's null. Okay, if you try to pull it up by, give me all the spaces, you're not going to get the null values. If you try to pull it up by give me all the zeros, you're not going to get the null values. If you try to give, say, in fact, the funny thing is if you say equal to null, you still will not get anything. You've got to use an is null. Okay, so it's a really strange concept. Null is nothing. It's nothing. It's null. Okay, so how do you pull the null values out? Or say, for example, you've got a whole bunch of null values. It may distort your calculations in terms of doing averaging. So what we have is this null value function. So if you'll turn to page 152, what we have done is, in the middle of the page, we have select name, comma, NVL, wage, comma, 0. So basically what we're saying is wherever there is a null value for wage, replace it by 0. Wherever there is a null value for hours, replace it by 0. Okay, so that's what that means. So if you look back at page 150, wage, Ed Evans has a wage of 0, and because the null value of wage is replaced by 0, a 0 times whatever the value of hours is, 10, will give you a 0. So hence we have a 0 in the output there on page 152. Daryl Davis, on the other hand, on page 150 has a 0 for hours, and on page but does have a value for wage. But since we're putting in, I'm sorry, it doesn't have a 0 for hours, has a null for hours, and Ed Evans had a null for wage. So rather than the null, we are putting in a value of 0, and because we put in a value of 0, now the 0 times 18 will give you a 0. Okay, so both Daryl Davis and Ed Evans end up with a 0. Okay, so what we've done is with this NVL, we've said wherever there's a null value, replace it with 0. Okay, we could have said wherever there's a null value, replace it with 10, or wherever there's a null value, replace it with whatever. But that's what that NVL function does, is it pulls out the null values and replaces it by whatever value you want to replace it by so that you get more accurate results in terms of whatever you're trying to analyze, because those null values can give you erroneous results in your output. Okay, now we're going to talk about string functions for a second here. And I'm on page 153, 152/153. And string functions, there's just a whole bunch of string functions. And the first one we'll look at is the substring function, and then the in-string function. And I've gone ahead and given examples. So I'm going to just kind of let you flip over the pages here and do this. But again, this is going off the employee table, and the employee table hasn't really been created for you. So if you want to create it, create the table as is with the data on page 150 in order to get, to work with these examples. But string functions, although they're very easy, it's just a matter of knowing them, and once you know them, you either know them or not. It's a really easy concept. There's not much to it, but at the same time, it's a very powerful concept. I mean, if you think about it, the World Wide Web is dependent on string functions. I mean, you type in part of a word, and there comes out all the different possibilities that you want to look at. So, I mean, everywhere you are, you're using string functions. I mean, you go to, maybe the doctor's place or whatever, and they type in part of your name, or type in your first name or your last name, or whatever. I mean, if they're typing in your first name or last name, they may be pulling it up by your first name or last name. But sometimes they could type in just 2 letters of your first name or 2 letters of your last name, and they hit the enter key, and they get the rest of the name up. That is string functions working on the background. So it's really a very powerful concept, and it's widely used. Okay. In the process, we talked about the concatenation operator. So, like for example, on page 156, if you look at that kind of big command that I have down there, select substring, open parentheses name, open parentheses in-string name. Anyway, to go on, the 2 lines are the concatenation operator. And then on page 157, we just talked about the RPad and the LPad, where you want to pad up the left side or the right side. Page 158, I talked about the length function, which is again another very useful function. If I want to find the size of any piece of text, you use the length function. The like function on page 159, again, like I said, it's one of the most used functions in the real world, because very rarely these days do you see people typing in complete, exact whatever it is that they need to find. They type in half of whatever it is, quarter of whatever it is, 2 letters, 3 letters, whatever. So it lets you pull out information using the wildcard idea. Okay, so that's the like function. And I've gone ahead and given a whole bunch of different examples. And so if you turn over the page, I have you create another little table called T. Smith on page 160, so you can go ahead and read that. And page 161, I talk about the wildcard character, the %, which is the wildcard character in Oracle. So you can go ahead and take your time to read that and try all of that out. And then there's the position match, which I talk about on page 163. And then there's the upper or lower that we talk about, so page 164. Now, the like is case sensitive. Okay. Sorry, the data is case sensitive. Not the data, but when you use the like function. So you may want to emphasize or rather look at page 164 and how we handle the issue of case sensitivity, because if you notice on page 162, we were pulling out all just the capital Smiths, okay, all of the capital Smiths in there. So page 164 shows you how you could pull out, where it may be capital or not. Okay, so that's what this chapter is really. It's a really very important chapter, but it's not too hard. But there are a few concepts that are the NVL concept is a very important concept, and then the concept of the different string functions, which, like I said, the string functions are rather easy to work with, but You just have to know that they exist and be able to use them in the right way. So in the exercises, I have you go through and manipulate a whole bunch of different things so you can play with it. Okay, with this, I'm going to end this lecture right here. And if you have any questions, please email. Otherwise, bye.